It's hard to believe that just 6 months ago, we were harvesting garlic from these beds over here. Our herbs were thriving, and this trellis was full of cucumbers. Now our garlic is tucked away under a bunch of snow. Our herbs are safe in our greenhouse, and our trellis is getting ready for its next crop to be grown on it. Hey everyone, it's Nora from Nora's Ark here, and it's January in Wisconsin, so it's cold and it's gray. But January is a great time for reflecting on the garden and dreaming about next year's garden, or this year I should say. And so what we're going to be talking about today is how we tracked all of our harvests last season. So we'll be talking to you about the process of how we did that. Then we will reveal our top 5 producing crops for last season. And at the end of the video, we will reveal the total amount of food that we harvested from our land here, which is just under an acre. And the number is pretty shocking, so you're gonna wanna stay tuned for that. So let's get inside because it's cold, and let's talk about how we tracked all of our harvests. Before we get into how we tracked all of our harvests from last season, let's talk about why we decided to do it. So the first reason is because you're doing a lot of work out there. You do a lot of work every day in the garden, and it's fun to look back on the fruits of your labor and see how much food you produced from your garden. Second reason is it's just fun. We love gardening. It's one of our favorite hobbies. And why would you want to tell your mom, I harvested a lot of tomatoes last weekend, when you could say something like, I harvested 50 pounds of tomatoes last weekend. It just gives you a lot more fun stories to tell about your garden to your friends and family. And then last reason is because it's science. We're doing science out there in the garden, and it's important in science to have good record keeping. So you want to look back and see how many pounds you got from a certain plant. Maybe you want to plant less of that plant next year, or you want to plant more because you didn't get as much food as you expected from it. So it's helpful to have those reference points to look back on and see how much you actually got. So now that we talked about why we decided to do this, let's get into how we actually did it. So quite simply, we just harvested stuff from our garden, would bring it inside, we would weigh it on this digital scale, and then in our little notebook, we would have a page for each crop, and then we would write down the date and the amount of ounces that we harvested from the garden. Then about once a week, once a month, whatever we had time for, then we would enter it into our laptop on a spreadsheet. And you could definitely do this without the laptop portion and just track everything in a notebook. But what's nice about the spreadsheet is you're able to look at numbers, analyze the numbers in different ways. Like you can see how much I harvested in September, October. It's easier to do that in a digital spreadsheet than it is to do it in like a static notebook. So the first thing I want to talk about, most important thing, the scale, because you're weighing things. We really like this digital scale for a couple reasons. One is that it's really easy to switch between pounds and ounces. You'll notice that I said we wrote down everything in ounces. So we tracked everything in ounces, and then we converted it to pounds later. The reason for that is because you might not always get a pound or two of something from the garden, and it's just a lot more accurate and precise when you do it in ounces and then convert it to pounds. And then the other reason we really like this scale is because you can move this part of it. So if you have a really big basket of something that you're harvesting, then you can move this around so that way you can still see it. So that's really nice about that scale. And then just notebook, that's just simple. It's just easier to bring stuff in from the garden and write it down in a notebook rather than getting out your laptop and putting it into the spreadsheet every single time. So that's why we decided to write it down in the notebook and then transfer it to our spreadsheet, which we'll talk about now. So our spreadsheet setup, it's really simple. We just have our crops across the top. Then we have the total in ounces rolling up to the top, and then the total in pounds, which we just took the ounces and divided it by 16. Along the sides, we have all of our dates. We tracked from June 2023 to November 2023. I believe our last crop was carrots, and I think that was on November 9th. And then something else I wanted to mention is we have 42 different crops that we tracked, which is a lot. It's pretty crazy. We only live on like 3/4 of an acre and we're just 2 people, but we tracked 42 different crops. But what I wanted to mention about that is we still didn't necessarily track every single piece of food that came out of our garden. So we probably tracked 90% of it if I had to put a rough percentage on it. And what I mean by that is like, we didn't track all the oregano that we picked and put in our dinner, or when we grabbed some thyme, or if we grabbed carrots or tomatoes and made a quick vegetable dinner or something like that. We weren't tracking all of that because that would have just been like stressful to do all of that. So I just say that to say, don't make it stressful and think you have to track every single thing that comes out of your garden. But we did try to aim for 90%. And that I just mean like when we did our big harvest, we definitely weighed them and added them into there. So I just say that to say, keep it fun and don't make it stressful. So now that we talked about why we tracked our harvests and how we did it, let's get into the fun part, the top 5 crops that we harvested. So I'm gonna go from 5 to 1 to build up the suspense. So we'll start with crop number 5, and that was beets. This will come as no surprise to any of you guys who have watched any of our other videos. We had a big beet patch out in our garden this year, and we got a ton off of that beet patch. To be exact, we got 80 pounds of beets. That's a lot. But we love eating beets, incorporating them into different meals. They're super nutritious, and I think they're considered a superfood. So it's definitely good to eat a lot of beets. We also sell a lot of beets as well. And a couple of our favorite things to make with beets, one is borscht, that's a soup. And then we also make really good beet burgers. And we did a video on those, so I'll include a link in the description to that. Number 4, one of Annie's favorites, cucumbers, coming in at 93 pounds. That's a lot of cucumbers. We grew cucumbers along our fence and also in the trellis in front of our house, and we got a lot of cucumbers from that. Some of our favorite things to do with cucumbers are just eating them fresh on sandwiches or salads. We also like to make fermented pickles, and then we also really enjoy making a relish out of our cucumbers. Number 3, this will come to no surprise to anyone else who gardens, was cherry tomatoes. We got 104 pounds of cherry tomatoes. That is a lot of cherry tomatoes to pick and a lot of cherry tomatoes to deal with. So with cherry tomatoes, we love eating those fresh, putting them on salads, sandwiches. You see a trend here. And then we also make a really good tomato jam from our cherry tomatoes. We sell that at the farmer's market and share it with a lot of our family and friends, and they love it. Number 2, this is a crazy one. We harvested 120 pounds of our zucchino rampicante. That is a squash, and that is a lot of squash to deal with. So 120 pounds, that was definitely a ton of food. And the crazy thing is that with our zucchino rampicante, we only had 1 plant. So we started that from seed. So 1 seed gave us 120 pounds of food. Like, let that sink in. That's crazy. So that's definitely a good plant to plant if you think that I want to produce a lot of food for my family. And then number 1 is our big heirloom tomatoes. We harvested 130 pounds of heirloom tomatoes. That's crazy. So, I mean, if you guys grow tomatoes from the garden, you know there's nothing better than a fresh tomato from the garden. And we love eating tomato sandwiches in the summer. That's one of our favorite things to eat. We also will use our big tomatoes to make tomato sauce, and we also do a lot of canning with our tomatoes as well. I really hoped you guys liked hearing the top 5 crops, but as I promised in the beginning of the video, now I'm going to reveal the total amount of pounds of food that we harvested from our garden. So if you guys have been following us for a while, you know that we garden on less than an acre. We live on about 3/4 of an acre. We're just 2 people. We both have full-time jobs. This is our second full-time job. And so I'm just saying all of that to say that we live on a small amount of land and it's possible to produce a lot of food. So what is that number that is a lot of food? We produced 952 pounds of food from our less than an acre piece of land. That's crazy. Say that again, 952 pounds. And we only have a garden that's about 1,000 square feet, and then we also have some raised beds and some fencing that we grow food on as well. So I hope that's inspirational to anybody out there who maybe doesn't have that much land. And so I just want to say, like, showing you guys that you can get a lot of food from a small amount of space. All in all, I hope you guys enjoyed this activity of looking back on the garden and reflecting on the garden in January with me. I definitely had a lot of fun looking back at all of the stuff that we produced from our garden last year. And I'm excited to see what we're going to produce in the garden this year. So if you learned something from this video, please give it a thumbs up and make sure that you subscribe to our channel so that way you can see what our next garden is going to look like.